How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, the bring to you is going to be the new meta tier list for the January meta that we're going to be getting into here. It does start today, so that's definitely very interesting. We'll see how all of this kind of plays out. There are a lot of very minimal changes. We do have OSS bans, so you won't be able to go Snake Eyes into anything now. It's realistically just going to be Snake Eyes by itself, and we'll talk about that when we get to it on the tier list. We got one Phantom of Yubel, which is interesting because now we have 3 openings, so Yubel is still very good, still very strong. And then now we just probably won't really see Tenpai. We'll have to see whatever happens with that, but definitely in an interesting position now. I'm going to kind of speed through some of these and talk a little bit longer on some of these because there's a lot here that I have because there's a lot to talk about. So I'm just going to hop right in with White Forest. White Forest is still just tier 2. Once it gets its new support, I believe in Suda, it's going to be a lot better. I would say 1.5 or 1. I think the deck becomes absolutely absurd. It's very, very good with the new support, but right now it's kind of mid. It's okay. You can play it, you can pick it up for later, but I wouldn't recommend it right now. The next one is going to be Yubel. It's still like tier 1.5. I just think there's other decks above it right now, but we'll talk about those as we get to them. I think that Yubel definitely is still really strong. One Phantom, a lot of people are saying that it's going to matter a lot, and I could understand where you're coming from on that, but like, I feel like the deck does enough even with one Phantom. Now, having Tenpai as just an engine, I feel, is going to be interesting. I think that now you play just like very minimal of them and play them with a different deck potentially. We'll have to see what kind of innovation comes for this, but I do think that Tenpai is going to be ending up as more of an engine rather than its own deck. Yeah, you can run 3 Dora, 3 Pydra, set rotation, raid saw, and summoning, and you can still do Tenpai things, but not as consistently. And once your one Kaiman gets ashed, it's kind of over. But that's how it was before, though, right? Like, if you went into battle and you're like, activate Kaiman, and they ash you, a lot of times you just saw them scoop anyway. So it's like, the consistency isn't there, but like, if a Tenpai player catches you in battle phase and Kaiman resolves, it's still rough. It's still rough. The other one that's now an engine is going to be Snake Eye. So Snake Eye doesn't have the way to get from the Deception line into Snake Eye cards because there's no OSS, so that means Archelago is a lot worse. But it's still really efficient to go like Bonfire into Ash, Ash into Poplar, Poplar into Divine Temple, get the Oak in the Spell Trap Zone, use Ash with the Oak to go into Flamberge, link off Flamberge and Poplar into like IP, Flamberge bring back the Oak and the Ash, and the Oak bring back Poplar, and now you have 4 bodies on board, right? So that as an engine, I feel like alone is very strong still, and we're definitely going to see that somewhere. I'm just not sure where. Branded, it's like bottom of the barrel tier 2. It's not very good with one branded fusion. It literally hasn't done anything. So definitely waiting to see what Branded can do. It definitely got backhanded on the ban list because like Jowgen is a Suda hit, but it also was like a hit for Sanctifier, but there's still Ito and Ra's Disciple, so it just didn't really make sense to me, but I mean, whatever, I guess. Branded's not really that good. Fluanderiz would just be in Don't. We saw this deck at the event, and it just didn't perform well. With all, like, the Perelias running around, and just the power ceiling of other decks, I just don't really think that Flu is the deck that I'd ever recommend to bring into a tournament at the moment. It's just not very good. Probably toward the top of tier 2 right now would be Centurion. It's still a deck that you can play, especially into this format. It's going to be interesting to see how it fares into things like Malice and the Ryziel deck. But the one thing it does have is that, again, it can play through Shifter. So still a pretty viable strategy and something that if you want to keep playing, you're pretty fine to do so. Melodious, for me, I'm saying it's bottom 1.5. I think this deck is still very strong. I've said this deck is very strong. I really do respect Melodious. The deck is super cheap. If you do not have this deck and you want to be able to compete at a nice level in the game, pick up Melodious. It's a nice deck to have. It's something that will perform very well. Sharks, don't. I'm always going to be of this opinion. I just don't like this deck. I just think that it's so cope. Same with, like, Salad. I wouldn't play Salad. You can put it in Rogue because, like, it does okay sometimes, but, like, it's just don't. Like, I would not recommend anyone pick any of these decks up and play it actively, right? Unless you're trying to just have fun, then sure. But, like, other than just having fun, do not buy these decks. Go after, like, these, right? Especially Melodious, it's so cheap. Another deck that you can get pretty cheap is Striker, and this is also going to be, like, mid-tier 2 right now. Striker has a ridiculous matchup into Ryziel, and I actually really liked that deck this format. If I would have went to Anaheim, I think I would have been on a blind second Striker list to be able to just counteract the Ryziel decks at top tables. And I really do like Striker right now. I think that it's just a really good spot for the deck right now. Plunder, it's just Rogue. It usually jumps between like tier 2 and Rogue. But Plunder's interesting. It's just not like that crazy at the moment. Another one in Rogue is just going to be Drytron. Yeah, we have 2 EVA now, but that doesn't really change anything either. And I wouldn't really expect it to change anything, so I'm just going to leave that in Rogue. Chimera, bottom of tier 2. It's basically whoever Brandon's at for the most part. I don't think Chimera is like that real. It's very like okay, but it's not something I would ever recommend. Our first tier 1 deck is going to be Malice. The deck performed exceedingly well at the event, but here's one thing I will say about Ryziel and Malice. All the players that you would expect to be on things like Fire King, including like Landon Oliver, who is on Ryziel, and he's just very proficient with Fire King, very good with the deck, just chose to play a different deck. And that'll happen when new decks come out that are justified as being good, because at that point you just won't have the same representation of other decks that you usually would. And I think that's a really important note to make, because had, let's say for example, Oliver chose to play Fire King, I think he would have done just as well. And, you know, it just becomes a thing about representation of how many of each deck do you see, and then the odds of actually converting just are naturally higher. So I do think that these decks have a lot of potential in them, and I think that they're both very strong between the Malice deck and the Ryziel deck. I think they're both very good. I do want to just point out, though, that we'll have to wait and see more into the format, how well they fare and everything else, because again, it just is a very big dependent on like how many people play what deck, and a lot of times that's how we see decks become better, is because they have a higher representation into tournaments. Kashtira, I would say if you're just playing it, it's probably like somewhere like mid-tier 2 as like a control stun-ish deck. I really want to say that it's like now more of an engine, but it like is an engine and there's also like its own thing, but I see it more as an engine in the wild, you know? So I would probably leave it as like an engine, even though like as a deck by itself, it's tier 2, but like Cash should just splash into like literally everything right now. So Voiceless Voice is going to be competing for that tier 2 slot at the top with Centurion. I think that Voiceless might even be a little bit better than Centurion. I do think that the deck has a lot of potential still. And Voiceless Voice performed at this YCS where Centurion did not. So definitely very interesting to see. And I'm sure that Voiceless will be around for a while, to be honest. For some more don'ts, we have Adagnister, we have the Earth Machine deck, we have the Gimmick Puppet deck. Let's see what else we have. Not a whole lot else, to be honest. Probably even like Dark World. Again, I usually will always tell people to not play Dark World. The deck's just not very good, and it's just one of those things where it's just cheese. If you ever try to win with cheese, like, yeah, sure, you'll get there sometimes, but like a lot of times you won't, and that just feels bad. We're going into a very diverse meta. This is what's about to happen. We will see Ryziel and Malice toward the top, but we'll also see the Fiendsmith deck at the top as well. This deck is really, really cool. I genuinely enjoy this deck a lot. Just pure Fiendsmith with a ton of hand traps. Sometimes you'll see like some Kashtira cards in the deck. It's really fun to play, and I'm very happy to see it up there. We have another don't in Madolche. The Musket deck isn't even a Musket deck. I'm just gonna put Musket as an engine because that's all it was into the Fiendsmith deck that we've been seeing lately. It's like 4 Musket cards and a max. So I would just put it as an engine because it's just supporting the Fiendsmith deck at the moment. Marincess can just be in Rogue or don't. I think this deck is still very cool. A 1-card starter and a ton of hand traps, but if you're gonna do anything like that, you might as well just play Ryziel, right? So, I don't know. Still another option, but not a very good one. Rescue up in 1.5. Rescue's about to be crazy. I know that you don't have like the Snake Eye line to go into like your Hydrant, but 3 Airlifter and the deck still having just about every piece it needs, deck is still very strong. So I'm a big fan of this. Usually it was just like 3 Bonfire and 1 Poplar to get to your OSS anyway, so it's like not like a huge part of the deck, but it still was very important to the deck. So now that we're just seeing Rescue by itself, I think that we see some Rescue tops still, like Fiendsmith Rescue. I like the deck a lot. I'm probably going to be looking at that deck myself because I think the deck is very strong. Tier Limit is just going to be like Topper Rogue. Not really doing anything at the moment. Shifter, Dweller, it's unfortunate. So the deck's not really going to be performing. Neither will I probably be playing it at the moment. Purely, somewhere in Rogue. We have the Thunder Dragon decks, probably in the Don't. The Plant deck is just in Rogue. The Dragon Link deck right now is in Rogue. The Bestial Control deck right now is in Rogue. Labyrinth, I would say Labyrinth is up in 1.5. Labyrinth has a ridiculous matchup into Ryziel, being able to just loop D barrier. I think that Labyrinth, if you're very good with Labyrinth and you've put in the time and you really understand what Labyrinth can do, that Labyrinth is one of the scariest decks in the room right now. Again, still pretty cheap deck, and that's something where if you're actually going to be trying to compete with Labyrinth, you'll have a good time if you do your research on it. Runic Stun, being in Rogue, sure. Lightsworn, probably don't. It's just another deck where it's like, you could, but like, when you see this many decks on top of these, you're just like, okay, there's like 100 other decks that you could play right now that are going to perform that much better. Sword Soul, I would put in Rogue. I think that it still has a lot of potential. The Millennium deck is still very good. It's still a very strong deck. I would put it in tier 2, probably like mid-tier 2. That's still a deck that I definitely enjoy and think that you should consider. Very strong deck for its own regard. Tier 2, some kind of Sprite variant is probably fine. I've never really hated Sprite for like the Adventure variant or even being able to go second with things like Gamma Burst and Mosquito, so definitely a lot of potential in that deck as well. I would put the Mimigul deck somewhere in Rogue, plays Shifter, has a really good time into some matchups. I don't think it's that bad. Memento is going to be up in 1.5. The deck proves time and time again that it's a force to be reckoned with. If you're going to be playing against Memento, that you're knowing that you're going to be in for a ride. The deck itself can do quite a bit, especially with the Fiendsmith cards, so that's something where you want to be really versed in what that deck does so you don't get caught off guard. The Pure Fire King deck, I would put somewhere in tier 2, probably between Voiceless and Centurion. Now just playing Pure Fire King isn't even that bad, because you still probably play like the Bonfires, the Ash, the Poplar, and try to go for like the different bodies on the board as like extenders for like Divine Temple. Usually you don't play Divine Temple in these kind of lists because you want to make sure that you always have Fire King Island up, but if you do open up with like Ash, you can put a ton of bodies up really fast to be able to get your plays rolling. So I could see that being a thing potentially moving forward. I don't think that we're going to see the end of Fire at the moment. I think that we're going to see quite a bit of it still, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Ritual Beast is still going to be, like, probably up here, top of tier 2 with these guys. Ritual Beast is, like, okay. It has a really bad time into both Mulch armies. So we'll have to see if the deck can perform through that. Same with Nibiru. Cards really rough for that deck, and all those cards are in everyone's list right now. So it puts Ritual Beast at a really awkward position. Mermail and the Vanquish Soul deck I'm going to put in tier 2. I think that both of these have enough respect on them already that it's fine to put them both in tier 2, especially Vanquish Soul. I know that a lot of people haven't really seen a ton of it, but I think the deck still has a lot of potential. Hopefully get some support soon, but I do like the deck at the moment. I think that it's another one that could perform pretty well. I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already checked out my TCGPlayer link down below in the description, if you do plan on buying cards off TCG, just use my link. It just helps out the channel. And, you know, I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you.